Okay, so I'm back in San Francisco now, and I haven't really had a whole lot of time since I got back from Ann Arbor, where I was all last week, to really put a whole lot together. There are a couple of things that I want to show that we had talked about last week in terms of processes for tracking some of our work and how to request help with Revit. And the two things that we're putting together, and these are sort of underway, and let me know if you have any suggestions for columns that may need to be added to these tracking tools. But I have a browser open, and I have two windows open, or two tabs open. One is a Google Doc spreadsheet, sort of similar to the spreadsheet that we used when we were getting all of our standard families built up. But this one is for all of our in-process families, and I'm making this in response to some comments that I got last week about designers wanting to know who was working on which families and not duplicate work if people are starting sort of the same family at the same time. So this is going to be a centralized way for us to track which families you guys are creating, and if somebody has something that you need, this is a place to check. So check Blue Standard, see if it's in there. If it's not in there, check this document, and I'll send a link out to everybody so they can access it. This is also going to be a way for me and the other Revit managers, Andrew Bodley and Michael Hawks, to see what is waiting for our approval and what we need to look over and move to Blue Standard so that you guys can load things into your projects. And so that's what these columns over here are for. So you as the designers would fill out family information, the BOM lookup as you get it from Laura, which project it's associated with, and then over here, when you made the family, your names so that we know who to contact to make any comments or suggestions to, and then when it's approved and who approves it. So yeah, I'll send you the link to this. If you guys have any comments or want me to add anything, let me know. But I think this is going to be, the last spreadsheet seemed to work pretty well. And so hopefully this one will be really useful for keeping things organized, both for you guys and for me to keep track of what needs to be done. The other thing that I'm setting up, and it's not totally ready yet, I still want to talk about exactly how it's going to be structured, but a more formal system for requesting Revit help. Andrew and Michael were gracious enough to help me out and to take on some additional responsibilities in terms of helping people in the various offices with their Revit questions. But those guys also have their own projects that they're working on and can't sort of drop everything at the drop of a hat to help out designers and still stay on track with their other stuff. So I think what I'm going to ask you guys to do whenever you have Revit issues is to log it on a Trello board, which all of us are going to be subscribed to. And so we can pick up work from all of the other offices. I think it was sort of unfair for me, who has probably the most time to deal with Revit stuff, to have the least amount of designers in the office, and therefore the least amount sort of intrusion onto my time to help out with those issues. So hopefully this will be a way that I can support everybody in all offices. Again, if you have something that's absolutely, totally urgent, you can depend on the good graces of the people in your office. But it's really my responsibility, so I want to take back some of that and become the primary contact for that stuff again, so that the other people who are helping don't get overwhelmed. So I haven't totally set that one up yet, but I'm going to formalize that a little bit more and hopefully, make it, again, easier for me to keep track of who needs what so that I don't forget about things and it doesn't fall through the cracks. So no huge changes, but just a couple of things I'm trying to put together to make things easier to organize and make sure that you guys get the help that you need and you're not just sort of floundering and waiting for things. That's really all I have. I've had a day here to sort of dig out, so I haven't been able to update the seed models with all the suggestions that I got from you guys last week, and I will do that as soon as I can and roll those out, but yeah, I haven't had a chance to get to that stuff yet. Okay, that's all I have. So it's open. If you guys want to talk about this stuff or you have any recommendations for this, feel free to either say it here or give me a call or an email. And then if you guys have anything else, I'm all ears.
Hey Luke, quick question. I know there's some families in the families generic folder that's like the standard Autodesk stuff that we've been using, like the vent stack for plumbing vent to show where we want the plumbing vent stack to go, and I think the range hood family that we've been using is from that folder as well. Is there any desire to move those things into the standard folder so that they're easier to find, especially for some of the new people, or do we want to just leave them where they're at?
I'm not quite sure. So I'm assuming that these are things that don't need to be in the BOM, that don't need any sort of schedulable parameters or taggable parameters applied to them. Is this?
For the most part, yeah. I can't remember if the range hood is on the BOM, or like the range hood vent cover that goes on the roof or the side of the house is in the BOM or not. Does anybody else have any insight into that?
It should. There's a manufacturer, and it actually has gone through a couple revisions because the one that we were procuring before was like insanely expensive.
So this is stuff that does need to be communicated to procurement?
I don't know, because I've never seen it in a BOM, but I know there is a very particular manufacturer for it, so it could be something that they just buy stock of, but you would need to coordinate the size of your ducts and the size of your vent hood and all that stuff. So I think we would want to be at a point where we BOM that stuff, because like a 4-inch duct and a 6-inch duct isn't going to be the same thing. Same thing with like a round and a square, or if it's got a hood, or if it's got a grill and all that, and colors and all that. I don't know.
Yeah.
I would ask Laura if it has a BOM object lookup. If it does have a lookup, then we should probably have a standard model or standard family for it.
Yeah.
And then the types that show.
Yeah, I mean, as soon as it goes into the BOM, then it needs all of the all of the BOM information, and so it needs to go through the in-process process. So how does that work from a designer standpoint? You're like, oh, I need to put this thing in my model. So you just like go and drag it out of the generic families and put it in your model, or is there, like, who should we ask? Who should the designers ask as they are modeling something, whether it needs to go into the BOM or not? Is there a procedure for that at this point? Do we ask Laura? Do we ask Josh? Do we ask procurement? Like, what's the? I don't know of that process.
I think most of us usually check with Laura. Most people, that's why, myself included, that's usually what the project I've been working on, what we've been doing.
That's probably the right answer.
Because they also spend more time talking with procurement about kind of what they want to see in there or not, so I think that is the best source to go to.
Okay, so it's an ask Laura, and I guess if she says yes, it does need to be in the BOM, then we know what we need to do with it. But let's say she says no, it doesn't need to be in the BOM. Then should we move it to Blue Standard?
Then it doesn't matter because it's
Yeah.
show up in the BOM anyway, so they can do whatever they want. Like they can use the one that's in their local that comes with Revit, or they can use the one that's on the S drive or not.
That's right.
But I would
Yes.
think that it would need, like, whatever you use probably needs some kind of, like, call out or something, like color, finish, size. I mean, like you can't use a 4-inch hood, exhaust hood with a 6-inch
Well, but
duct or whatever.
yeah, I guess. But if it's not being bombed, how does procurement get that item, and how do they get information about that?
Which is why I think they're going to want it. But
Yeah.
Well, no, I mean, there's still a lot of areas where they have to go to the drawings or go to the there's a lot of sort of specifications that we don't necessarily have in our model as bombed, and then there's also, of course, the indirect parts that are put in later to the database. So it's there's sort of a lot of elements I think that are outside of just being in our model that also get into the sort of final BOM that everything's ordered off of.
Well, and then you have the issue of like booster plus items where you might need, or site-built elements where you're not going to need a blue standard or a BOM thing because it's just conventional construction. You might find what you need in blue standard, or I'm sorry, in generic family.
Yeah, that's true.
what would that be? Because, I mean,
Well, for example, I had a project where I was putting in a fireplace, and it was in kind of an atypical install, so I had to model the fireplace up to make sure that we weren't going over the manufacturer's recommended maximum vent length. So I just used like a generic duct to do it, and generic duct fittings, and use the tools in there to run it, and just to make sure everything was clear. I mean, they're not. It's like a stock part, right? So they're not going to need to, take procurement of that.
I guess ducting and stuff like that, yeah, it totally makes sense. But if it's a client, like if something you see, I would think that we would need to call out something specific. I don't know.
Yeah, I guess the answer for now is that if if procurement hasn't asked for it and we don't need to provide it in the BOM, then use whatever you need to use. I mean, it doesn't seem like we really have any restrictions until we get to the point where, okay, yes, this either needs to be called out with a tag or it needs to show up in the BOM. But I feel like that's sort of out of our hands in terms of when that switch happens. Like, I feel like we should just wait for procurement to say this needs to be in here, and then we'll deal with it and be specific about it. But until that point, let's just, let's not make things hard on ourselves, and let's just use whatever we need to use to, get design intent across, or to, check vent length or whatever it is that we need to check.
So then for vents in particular, who's checking that they are actually being put in?
Into the model or
Yeah.
in the factory?
No,
I
in
think
the model.
That's a
that
project
should probably be part of the factory handoff model check, right? Like someone.
I actually don't know. I mean, I don't know what the handoff process is like, but
I mean, I was thinking that's something that a project architect should redline as they're going through a set, right? I mean, because isn't it their responsibility to check and make sure that the project designers have everything in there showing up on the drawings as it needs to show up? Because you need to show venting on drawings.
yeah.
So that should be a part of the PA check before state submittal or before schematic. Like, when does it matter if those things are in? Definitely by state.
I mean, there's a certain extent where if it's like a mechanical, electrical, or other utility element, that it's going to be on the consultant's drawings, but it's not necessarily going to be in our Revit model. So sometimes we might, like for example, in that case, like I did it because it's in the schematic set. We're not going to get a mechanical engineer on board till later, and I didn't want to have to leave it to the last minute to find out we couldn't fit the fireplace in there. So like that was one situation, and I don't know, like. But yeah, you're right. It's one of those
But
things
if you don't think of that as a designer, like, I mean, it's great that you did, but you know,
Right.
someone else who doesn't have as much experience comes in and is like, oh, I don't know that I need to model that. Whose responsibility is it to double check that designer's work and make sure that that's in there?
Yeah. No, I mean, yeah, I guess you're right. That's
Yeah.
like a drawing check thing, you know, like, and that's something we've been talking about here is you know, having the project architect and peer reviews on drawings, but yeah, it seems like removed from the scope of being like a BOM issue or a Revit model issue. I mean, because theoretically, like if you drew it in with detail lines, it would still print on the drawing, and I don't know. Not that you can do that, or not that in every situation it's bad to do that, but I don't know.
Yeah, I think with vent stacks, it's pretty easy to locate them based on what the MEP engineer, where the MEP engineer tells you to put it, and then it shows up in all your drawings and elevations, and then it should be the PA's responsibility to check to make sure that they're called out with text notes or whatever to make sure that...
Is it also the project architect's responsibility to check that sizes are correct?
What? Like vent?
Like if each duct has a 6-inch vent.
I think that'd be overkill beyond their scope.
I think that's part of
That's-
engineering
yeah.
shop drawings, like duct sizes and stuff. At least when I was out there, that's what they were dealing with.
So, like one issue, and I think this came up on K4, was 2 ducts were right next to each other, like 2 exhausts were right next to each other, and one was a 4-inch and one was a 6-inch. And if they were both the same size, it would look okay, but because one was 4 and one was 6, it looked goofy when they're right next to each other. And, you know, like, it is kind of, you know, it is a client-facing issue, and as designers, I think we would care about something like that. So whose, I guess, responsibility is to check, like, oh, this has a 6-inch duct, so I need a 6-inch exhaust, versus just plopping in a generic model for a duct and saying, oh, there's one here, but I'm not 100% on the size of it. And, you know, maybe in schematic, it's like overkill to look into that too much because we actually don't know. But as things move farther along to the point where we hand off a model, whose responsibility is it, and how do we communicate, like, the size of the vent?
Well, but that would
color,
be,
the finish.
yeah, maybe schematic is too early, but those things are definitely picked up as you're doing coordination for state permit. So I think the designer gets back mechanical stuff. I mean, and that, I assume that's what comes from consultants.
The schematic mechanicals do. And somebody correct me if I'm wrong because I haven't worked on a project in a little while, but I'm not sure if a project designer checks the duct sizes from a mechanical drawing that would coordinate.
They usually specify like the exhaust vent, like the necessary size at the wall, at the exterior wall, what size vent you need.
Okay.
And couldn't you, like, if you have a 4-inch dryer exhaust at the exterior wall next to the, say, the 6-inch HRV exhaust, couldn't you just put a 6-inch vent for both of them and then like have a duct that changes size inside the wall, you know? Like it goes, sort of transfers from the 4-inch to a wider 6-inch. That shouldn't be a problem at exhaust, right?
Right. Yeah, and that's a perfectly reasonable solution. You just need to know to do that.
Yeah.
And I don't know.
I mean, but is that not just to play devil's advocate here, I mean, is that an expectation we're talking about now, is changing the mechanical engineer's specification for duct exhaust for aesthetic purposes? Because I understand where you're coming from, but I also understand that, like, putting in extra elbows and fittings and the labor to do that for something that the client might not care about, like, or might not be on a visible portion of the house. Like, I just think that's more of like a project by project basis thing.
I think the elbows and all the ducts and stuff we shouldn't care about. But if it's something that we see, then we would need to know. We would need to communicate somehow that, hey, here's a 6-inch vent, but you need to transition to a 4-inch duct somehow. I don't know, or we leave it up to the engineering team and the shop drawings to make that decision, and that's kind of out of our hands.
Shouldn't that just be a note in the schematic before we send out to the consultants, notifying that these two vents size to match?
We could do that.
And then the consultants would do what they got to do to make sure that they capture our notes. So by the time we get drawings from them, hopefully they have captured that and have made the appropriate decisions to make that part happen. At least that's how I would do it.
Yeah.
All you care about is what you see. I want these two vents to match in size. Mechanical consultant, make that happen. And then I get drawings back later. Hopefully they made it happen. I check, and then we're all gravy.
Yeah, so then the responsibility is either you as the designer makes the change and notes it in your coordination, or the PA who checks the drawings, that schematic, makes the note. So like if you don't care about it as a designer and the PA who's checking your drawings doesn't care about it from a design perspective, then maybe you don't make the note on there. But if you really care about that and you make the note on there, then the consultant follows it. I mean, there's a certain level of standards I think that we would like to maintain in terms of, what design cares about and what design doesn't care about. But it sounds like all of these decisions are sort of within our purview. So if we want to deal with them, then we deal with them. But if the procurement team doesn't care about getting them on the BOM, and they are, that's the sort of process that doesn't really make a whole lot of sense to me right now, is how these things actually get spec'd and ordered if they're not part of the BOM, and procurement sort of knows
that would be part of the, well, in terms of the vent, it's part of the mechanical drawings, right? Part of the station set, which we hand off to the factory.
Yeah, I guess so.
So like mechanical first page or whatever, it's like these.
Just be the schedule.
It's just a schedule of materials.
Okay. Yeah, so if that's picked up through the consultant and communicated to procurement, then it seems like we've covered our bases then.
Yeah, and all the vents and registers, interior registers, exterior vents and stuff like that, those are on the BOM, and the material is just not applicable, so it's like paint to match or whatever, right? Is that how the color works typically? Is that how they do it at the factory when they have
I don't think I've ever seen them paint it. They've always just been like white or raw aluminum or whatever it is.
But like AZAC trim and that type of stuff?
No, the vents, like the vent hoods and stuff, they just kind of come out and they're either like whatever the metal color is, just a regular metal, or they're white.
Pretty much the factory doesn't put any of them on. They ship everything in a big box.
Oh, right, because you got to put them on site. They can't.
Because they stick out over the line.
Okay.
I mean, I think they're finished. Well, I know when I was out looking at Shaw, like those are all installed and painted. So I think the set crews are just figuring it out, right? Like getting it to match whatever else is on the exterior.
Is that a standard thing? I mean, I guess nobody knows, but like if nobody told them to paint it, why are they painting it?
Because they think it looks like hell, and they
Yeah.
and
I mean, I think
that's fine.
since there's not a real drawing to tell the set crew what they're supposed to be doing.
Just like Bill Hurd saying, hey, we should paint this thing, and find somebody to do it.
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah, and the NA in the model, that doesn't mean like we don't care what the finish is. It just means that for anything that has the NA, there isn't really an option. Whatever product that is you order doesn't have like an option for a color.
All right, so I feel like we didn't really make any decisions about anything during that conversation. which is totally fine. But yeah, my general idea is let's do what works for us until somebody tells us what they want, or ask somebody what they want and then try to satisfy them. But like for us to do a guessing game of, hey, we think you guys might want this thing to show up in the bomb, so that's not the best use of our time to sort of go chasing after stuff to give ourselves more work. So yeah, I would say let's just do what works for us for now, and if we don't need to have it on the schedule, we don't need to have it on the bomb. Yeah, take it from the generic stuff, and then maybe ask a question if you're feeling generous, and you can get a response from somebody in procurement about these sorts of things. But let's not, hold things off on our end for things that's going to make it easier for us based on what we're assuming somebody else wants.
So
yeah,
Luke, what's
sometimes
the best?
it's a little sometimes it gets a little fishy if you ask them, hey, do you want this in the bomb? Because ultimately their answer can be, yeah, we want it in there, but it doesn't necessarily mean that translates directly to. That means us in project design has to have it in the model bombed correctly. There's, you know what I mean? Like there's other ways it could get into the bomb either.
They could make it as an indirect part of something that we already have in there.
Right.
Yeah.
So it's just you got to be careful when that communication happens.
Yeah, and I'm going to be going to the factory far too often, far too soon, and I know I'll be meeting with Ken in procurement and sort of coming to a more fine-grained definition of how they're using the bomb, how they want things to be delivered. We had a short conversation last week when Josh Appleman and I were both in Ann Arbor about that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
So hopefully these sorts of questions where we're like, oh, I don't really know, those will slowly be worked out. But yeah, for now, let's not